Yes.
You are able to see the presentation, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ashok Srinivasan. I'm from Citrus Consulting. Thanks for joining for the session on Microsoft Azure for SAP. We'll just get started now. So the agenda we have put together is something like this: a brief introduction to Redington for those of you who are unfamiliar with Redington. Then who's Citrus Consulting? And then we'll straight get into the topic of SAP, Azure for SAP, why, what, and how. Yeah, so that's the agenda. Redington is a large IT distribution organization. I'm sure most of you are familiar. Most of you are in touch with Redington. So it's almost a $7 billion plus organization. It's a bit dated. Actually, it's much higher than that. The recent figures are much higher than that. We are spread across 80 plus locations worldwide, more than 25 years of existence, a lot of marquee brands. It's a publicly listed company. It's present across Middle East, Africa, Singapore, India, Turkey, and CIS. Yeah. So it's a conglomerate actually. Then Redington Gulf, which is the organization that focuses on that particular geography, where we cater to customers of your nature. Our presence is, it's across 100 plus brands, almost 15,000 customers, multiple markets, multiple entities, and we have been having a healthy growth of 36% compounded annual growth rate. So we are actually gaining prominence in that region, in the Gulf Africa region, right? And distribution is about, it has got a lot of talent when it comes to offering solutions to customers, be it pre-sales, sales, and so on. And we have won multiple awards, 30 plus awards in the last 5 years. And we have multiple innovation centers. In fact, if you happen to visit our Dubai office, there is a Redington Innovation Lab that you can, wherein you can look at number of solutions that are in place. And with respect to this particular division, it's about 600 million plus turnover. Again, we are spread across multiple countries and multiple geographies. So that's in a nutshell about Redington. Now I'll focus especially on Citrus Consulting. Citrus Consulting is a subsidiary of Redington, and we focus on enterprise consulting on large-scale IT solutions, cloud infrastructure, IoT, data analytics, etc. I'll just briefly touch upon those areas. So one of the areas, which is what brought us into this topic, is the cloud transformation services, wherein we help a lot of customers migrate to the cloud, be it Azure, be it other cloud platforms. And we focus on large and complex workloads, SAP being one of them. That is one of our focus areas. And then we also focus on IoT connected solutions. Data and analytics services is one of our key strengths, wherein we have offered multiple solutions to customers on Power BI, Pentaho, MicroStrategy, and so on. Information security is another forte that we have, wherein we help deploy solutions like Splunk and the ELK stack, setting up SIM infrastructure, and also implementing security solutions on the cloud. Be it firewall, be it WAF, be it other complex security solutions. And also we offer development services. Just to give you an idea, we are now working on an augmented reality based mobile application that will help an e-commerce organization to have that as a USP to strengthen their offering in the market, right? Then when it comes to modern IT transformation, which is where this focus on cloud services is coming from, it is cut across. It cuts across strategy, design, migration, operations, and GRC, governance, risks, and compliance. Right. I'll just briefly touch upon these areas. Strategy is where we help organizations formulate their strategy, be it cloud strategy, be it their IT transformation strategy. We start working with the business teams, understanding their business challenges, and then aligning technology with the business, strategizing that part. And then design is specific to solutions. For example, it could be deploying SAP on Azure. Then we do the complete design. Then we help organizations migrate to the cloud, to Azure, for instance, whereas it's risk-free and we do it in a very efficient manner, in an automated manner. So those are all the migration offerings that we have as part of this. And then subsequently, we also offer managed services where we help organizations to run these workloads on the cloud, again in an automated way, in a risk-free manner. Then specific to security, we offer GRC, governance, risks, and compliance offerings that take care of an ongoing security of those services. Yeah. So this is with respect to Citrus. Now we'll straight get into the topic, Azure for SAP. Chanakya, hope my voice is audible and the screen is visible. Just wanted to double check on that.
Yes, Ashok, very much audible and very much clear.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so always, when we start an initiative, it's better to start with the why. Why should we do something, right? It's not that we want to have fun, migrating a large workload like SAP to Azure. So start with the why, right? So one of the studies where Microsoft engaged Forrester was to look into the aspect of total economic impact of migrating, a large workload like SAP to Azure. So they have realized a number of benefits, right? Forrester worked with a number of organizations that have done migration to SAP and asked them the question like, what are the benefits you have seen? How do you quantify? How do you qualify, etc.? And this is the result of that survey, right? Actually, this paper is available on the net. So let me quickly touch upon the key benefits, right? One of the biggest benefits they have realized is saving on the legacy infrastructure, right? That means they don't have to maintain legacy hardware, they don't have to maintain their data center, right? So that's one of the biggest savings they have had. It is to the extent of 8.3 million, right? The other big benefit they have had is on what is called as rapid go-to-market, right? One of the challenges typically you have is whenever there is a new module release or a new function release, typically in an on-premises infrastructure, the amount of in an on-premises setup, the amount of infrastructure it takes is kind of prohibitive for you to consider that, right? Whereas when it comes to cloud, since the infrastructure is available on demand, you can spin up those virtual machines or storage or database or whatever, and then you can do your deployments quickly. For example, you are working on a new supply chain management initiative with one of your vendors that can be rapidly deployed on the cloud. So to that extent, they have realized $6.4 million, especially these organizations, to that extent, right? The other aspect is, typically what happens is in an SAP environment, a lot of over provisioning happens. Again, from the point of view that SAP is such a business critical application, you don't want your application to fail for want of additional infrastructure. So people have the tendency to over provision their infrastructure, whereas in a cloud scenario, we all know that it can be done on an on-demand basis. Again, in my presentation, I'll touch upon those topics as to how you can optimize cost, how do you, leverage scale out, scale up capabilities, etc. By leveraging those cloud capabilities, they have realized, savings of $3.1 million, right? The final one is around reallocation of IT staff, because the staff that are used for, your data center, networking, storage, etc. They can be reallocated or repurposed for some other activities. So that way, organizations have been able to save cost. So, in nutshell, it cuts across rapid go-to-market. It cuts across getting rid of your legacy hardware. It cuts across getting rid of your data center maintenance activities, etc. So there are a lot of benefits to be realized by migrating a large workload like SAP to Azure, right? I'll just go to the next slide. Right. Now, we have seen that why does it make sense? Now, what are some of the key considerations one should have, an organization should have while looking at migrating to Azure, migrating a large workload like SAP to Azure. Let me start with this scalability, right? So when we say scalability, one of the points I mentioned earlier was you don't have to over provision. But while you do not over provision, how do you make sure that you are able to scale? Again, Azure comes up with on-demand scalability options, be it in the form of auto-scaling functionality, or be it in the form of automation, be it in the form of horizontal scalability. There are multiple options that are available through which scalability is achieved, right? So that should be one of your key considerations. Then availability, right? When we say availability of resources within a region, availability of resources within a data center, because again, all said and done, Azure is a bunch of data centers, right? So how do you make sure that a data center failure within Azure doesn't cause your application to be disrupted, functionality to be disrupted? So that is one of your key considerations, right? And one of the other topics is disaster recovery. Actually, these are topics, we'll go in depth in the subsequent slides, but here I just wanted to touch upon the key considerations while you're focusing on migrating to Azure, right? The other aspect is disaster recovery. Some of you may be familiar about Azure regions, right? Azure data centers are spread across multiple regions. So one region can act as a backup for another, or as a disaster recovery site for another. So that is one of your key considerations. That has to be one of your key considerations. So while you design this, how do you make sure that DR is taken care of, right? The other aspect is responsibilities. See, since it's a new capability that you're, focusing within your organization, or you're taking up within an organization, you should be very clear as to who holds what responsibilities. See, so far you might have a data center manager or a network manager that is focusing on those areas. So when it comes to Azure, how do you make sure that those responsibilities are not missed, or not taken care of, right? So you should have clearly identified responsibilities with clear owners within your organization. That is what responsibilities topic means here. The other aspect is partnership. Here, the partnership is more on the aspect of SAP partnering with Microsoft. So you do not miss out on any latest and greatest developments that are there on SAP because Microsoft and SAP work together. So those capabilities are readily available to you on Microsoft Azure, right? So that is taken care of actually. But nevertheless, from your angle, you should make sure that the partnership is in place, so you do not miss out on any of the capabilities when it comes to new innovative offerings, right? The other aspect is innovation. Innovation here means how you are able to take care of your innovation requirements. Just to give you an example, see, once you go to Azure, SAP and Azure, one of the benefits benefits on the innovation front you might have is data becomes available readily to you across various platforms. For example, you can use something like an Azure Data Factory that can tap into the data that you have on SAP and then provide insights to you on the business front. For example, what is your AR account receivables? What is your AP on a real-time basis? Because all the systems are on cloud, security is taken care of. So this is something you can readily address on the cloud, right? So innovation should be one of your key considerations. The other aspect is automation, right? Automation actually has two dimensions. One dimension is naturally automation from the angle of efficiency, right? More and more you automate, more and more you save on the cost front. So that is the efficiency factor. The other aspect is, one of the things I mentioned earlier was on the go-to-market, right? While you are carving out new resources, new instances, new VMs, new storage units, etc., how do you make sure that those are not error-prone while you do them repeatedly? That is another benefit that automation offers. Again, Azure has got multiple options when it comes to automation. So that is the reason we have added it under the key consideration. Security, nobody can compromise on security, especially SAP workload containing a lot of sensitive data. How are you going to secure the workloads, right? Be it exposing to the internet or be it exposing from one landscape to another, how are you going to secure them? So that should be one of your key considerations. The final aspect is the cloud adoption. Cloud adoption, for some of you, cloud adoption itself may be new, for some of you, cloud adoption is something you may be familiar with. However, there is something called Cloud Adoption Framework that is available from Microsoft. How it helps you is that it gives you broad set of guidelines as to how particular landing zone can be prepared, how various subscriptions can be managed, right? How various resource groups can be created. So it gives you a lot of ideas around how the various Azure functionalities can be well leveraged without compromising on the governance model and the security, right? These are the considerations. I'll just pause for a few seconds. Any questions so far, or anything was unclear? Please feel free to ask me. And now we are going to the next section, actually. Okay, so I'll go to the next one then. Okay, one of the points, or one of the decision points for you is when to migrate, right? So I have just given you 3 pointers here with respect to when to migrate. Okay, one of the opportunities could be that when infrastructure comes up for refresh, your hardware is going out of support. That's one area or one opportunity where you can consider migrating to Azure, right? The other aspect is contract renewal. Maybe your hosting provider on SAP, the SAP hosting provider, the contract may be up for renewal. That's another opportunity for you to consider migrating to Azure. So one of the ways you can do is do a total cost of ownership and ROI analysis. Today I'm paying such and such, so many $1,000 towards this. When I migrate to Azure, what is going to be my outflow? And one of the things you may realize is that on Azure, it's actually pay as you go. You only pay for what you consume. There is no upfront cost or anything, right? Again, there is another aspect called reserved instance. I'll talk about it later. But typically, in a pay-as-you-go model, you don't incur any upfront cost, right? Whereas in your current contract, it may be such that you incur a lot of upfront cost. So it is a fantastic opportunity for you to have a relook at it and to migrate to Azure, right? The other aspect is migration to S4 HANA, right? I think by towards 2025, SAP is saying that HANA migration has to happen. So in your migration journey, you may be currently on ECC considering HANA. So that could be a fantastic opportunity for you to again, consider migrating to Azure, right? Yeah. Okay. Now I'll talk about the migration order. Before I go to the order, there is something called greenfield, brownfield. Again, some of you may be familiar, but let me quickly kindle your memory. Greenfield means that you are doing something afresh. Okay, that means you don't have anything on the cloud on Azure. You are starting afresh. That is typically a greenfield migration. Yeah. So you set up everything from scratch. The other aspect is called brownfield. What brownfield means is that you may have certain workloads on the cloud on Azure. Maybe it is your surround applications on SAP, or maybe it is some other applications, right? That means you are familiar with Azure functioning. There are certain subscriptions in place. There are certain resources in place, etc. So that is a brownfield deployment, right? Why I'm mentioning this greenfield and brownfield is that there are again 2 ways to look at it. In a greenfield, migration scenario, you can look at the cloud adoption framework and then start from scratch. It's one of the best practices recommended by Microsoft, so you can start from there. Or if you are a brownfield, if it's a brownfield deployment, you can look at have a relook at that and see how well it is fitting into your scheme of things. Yeah. So that is what greenfield and brownfield mean here. Now let me go to the other aspect. What are the various types of migration that can happen? So one is and here migration for all our benefit. It means it's typically from on-premises to the cloud. Yeah. So let me talk about AA here. Lift and shift to cloud. Lift and shift is fairly straightforward. You have, for example, 2 application servers, 1 database cluster, maybe a couple of gateways. those are just migrated onto the cloud, right? You are lifting and shifting, you are migrating the data, you are migrating the application, you are making sure that network addresses are taken care of, DNS names are taken care of, etc. One fine day, you are just there on the cloud. That's one of the simplest options, yeah. Wherein nothing changes, none of the OS changes, database changes, nothing changes, yeah. You are just taking the workload. You can do a VM migration, and there are various tools available like Azure Site Recovery, etc., that can help you migrate. So that is lift and shift, right? The other option is lift and migrate to cloud. Okay, what it means is that you may be lifting some part of the workload and migrating some of them. For example, you may be migrating your database, right? Or you may be upgrading from one to another. Okay, so that is lift and migrate. That is option B, right? And then the third one is lift and shift, migrate to cloud, migrate part to HANA. That means you have started leveraging HANA as part of this migration. Maybe you're on Oracle, maybe you're on SQL, right? You introduce HANA here. So that is got a subset or a sub function or a sub activity, which is migrate to HANA. That is what C means here. And then the other one is a complete transformation. Okay, what it means is that transformation of the workload, maybe from ECC to S4 HANA, right? So this can be a complete re-implementation, or it could be a greenfield implementation as well, right? So these are the four options. I'm not saying these are the only four options, but again, typically we have noticed that these are the four options typically organizations follow when migrating to Azure, right? What we commonly notice is that people who are not very familiar with the cloud capabilities, who want to take a very risk-free path, they typically adopt option A, right? Wherein they just take the workload, do the VM migration, do the database migration, and then one fine day they are on the cloud, right? So any questions on this? I'll pause for a while here, because these are the various approaches that organizations may have. Okay, I'll go to the next one. Okay, then the other aspect of migration is something called homogeneous and heterogeneous. Okay, let me touch upon that. What is meant by homogeneous is there is no difference at all, right? For example, you are on Windows Server 2016, SQL Server 2016, etc., and then you are just taking the same workload, same type to the cloud, to Azure. Okay, there is absolutely no difference. Both the workloads are identical. That is what is meant by homogeneous. Okay. Other aspect is heterogeneous, wherein there is some change. For example, you could be migrating from Windows to Linux for whatever reason. Maybe you feel that SLES is a better choice. SUSE Linux Enterprise is a better choice. You are migrating. Then it becomes a heterogeneous setup. Or you're migrating from Oracle to HANA, right? So then it becomes a heterogeneous setup. Now, what I have tried to indicate here is one of the options. See, when you are considering a homogeneous migration, what you can do is you can take an environment. For example, your entire sandbox environment can be taken holistically and taken onto the cloud, right? That means you can do your sandbox environment migration to the cloud, dev environment migration to the cloud, test environment, production environment. The entire landscape can be taken onto the cloud, onto Azure, right? Because nothing changes, right? However, when it comes to heterogeneous, the recommended practice is that you take a particular, functionality and then do that migration in entirety across various environments. Okay. The reason being that the underlying infrastructure is changing. Be it database, be it operating system. So you have to make sure that that functionality is achieved across all the environments. Because if you are getting stuck in one of the areas, for example, production, if you do not have a well-defined or identical dev environment, it becomes extremely difficult for you to troubleshoot that, right? So that is where it is recommended when it comes to heterogeneous, you take the entire stack or the entire functionality and take them onto the cloud, onto Azure. Yeah. So that is what is indicated here. Again, I'll pause for a few seconds. Any questions on this? Okay, fine. Okay, then one of the aspects I mentioned was responsibilities, right? This is purely a non-technical, I would say non-technical slide, but nevertheless, there are a few technical considerations as well. So what we are trying to indicate here is what are the various internal resources that should be focusing? What are the activities the internal resources should be focusing? How you can leverage the partners? How an organization like Microsoft can help you, right? Let me quickly touch upon this. Internal resources. See, one of the challenges we have seen, or one of the biggest risks. See, I'm not while I articulated all the benefits of cloud. One of the risk factors is also that cloud almost gives you everything on demand, right? Infrastructure on demand. So one of the key considerations you should have is how do you do cost management, right? You should have a financial governance model in place so that people do not over provision infrastructure. Especially if you look at SAP, later one of the slides will talk about it. You have large systems here, like 16 GB, 16 core, 64 GB kind of machines. Even if somebody provisions them for a few hours, the cost you are going to incur is a lot, right? So you should have a well-defined cost management, financial governance model in place. The other aspect is one of the key activities your internal resources can focus is also on automation. IAC means infrastructure as a code, right? Like I said earlier, cloud gives you, Azure gives you a lot of automation capabilities. So a lot of scripting can happen. In one of our previous slides, we spoke about migrating an entire landscape onto Azure, right? Why don't we look at an ARM template? Why don't we look at an automation script, a PowerShell script, Azure PowerShell script that can take an entire landscape and migrate them onto the cloud, right? So that's the level of automation you can consider, and that should be one of the focus areas for your internal resources. Security, no need to explain this any further, but security is certainly a key focus area for your internal resources. The other aspect is, your internal resources should also be focusing on some of the best practices, right? One of the areas we see that organization miss out while they migrate to Azure is, not leveraging something like Azure accelerated networking. This is one of the features that you need to turn on. If you forget to turn on, or if you do not turn on, then what happens is network speed is not accelerated. Hence, the overall performance might come down, right? So what we are trying to indicate is this is an area that some of your internal resources can focus, and also look at a virtual network appliance, something like NetApp, or you look at a virtual network firewall, virtual appliance, and so on. So these are some of the areas your internal resources can focus, right? The other aspect is, you can also leverage a partner ecosystem. You could have an incumbent partner that is currently helping with SAP, or you could have a Microsoft certified partner. The key point is Azure skill is a must, right? Because the very fact that you are migrating to Azure means the partner should have that capability. The other aspect is the right leverage. What we mean by right leverage is, certain partners can bring certain skills to the table. For example, they may be extremely good at Azure, but when it comes to SAP functionality, they may not be that good. So you should have a right balance of, the partners that can help you with this overall migration journey, right? And that's where partners like Citrus can help, Citrus Consulting can help. Then also Microsoft, from a Microsoft perspective, there's something called Fast Track for Azure that is available. Feel free to look it up on the net. It's a set of guidelines that are offered by Azure, that is by Microsoft. Then Microsoft also offers a role called Cloud Solution Architect. You may get in touch with your Microsoft account manager to leverage this position. And finally, you have the Microsoft Consulting Services. So the point is, partnership, partners and Microsoft can cooperate, co-work, and then deliver the right results for you. Yeah, that's what we are trying to indicate here. Yeah. Now we'll go to the next one. What are some of the initial considerations? Okay, so far we looked at why we have to migrate. Then what are the various migration orders, right? Then we also looked at what are the various responsibilities that are there. Now, okay, having decided, what are the other considerations when it comes to Azure for SAP? Now we are getting into the nuts and bolts of things. One of the things is to look at the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. It's a general guideline, right? The other aspect is to design Azure landing zone. I have actually given a diagram here just to give you an idea. It could be an hub and spoke architecture. You may have one hub location, in this case one hub Azure region, and then other regions, right, or other networks talking to that, right? So that you have to design. Subscriptions have to be decided. Resource groups have to be decided, right? Those are part of your Azure landing zone. Now, the other key aspect is network connectivity, right? One of the things you will realize is that this requires a lot of migration of data, right? So what are the various options available to you? One is called site-to-site VPN, wherein you may establish a VPN connectivity between your location, your data center, to the specific Azure region to which migration is happening. But the thing to remember here is it is completely internet based, so there is no quality of service. You are left to the best effort of the internet to deliver your data packets to the Azure region, right? So you may be extremely delayed in transferring the data. In fact, one of my subsequent slides talks about the typical speeds that you can achieve when it comes to data migration, right? The other aspect is called Express Route. Express Route is a service from Microsoft, wherein multiple ways in which they establish network connectivity between your data center and Azure region. Again, there are various options available, but the point is you should it comes at an additional cost, right? Site to site is something, it's cost effective, but like I said earlier, it is left to the best effort of the internet to deliver your packets, whereas Express Route is a dedicated connectivity. The other thing you have to consider is management groups. How do you organize the management groups so there are no overlaps? How do you manage your subscription? See, one of the practices, I wouldn't say it's a best practice, but one of the practices that is followed is to have subscriptions created for test environment, subscription created for production environment, and so on. So you can also decide on those things. And then resource groups could be organized according to the environment, according to the workloads, according to the functions, etc. And then the resources are well provisioned within the resource group. So these are all the considerations within that. Then the other key aspect is sizing. And sizing itself, again, there are guidelines available. In fact, one of my subsequent slides will talk about what are the sizing criteria for application server. So there is something called right sizing, right? Right sizing means in a typical SAP on-premises setup, you might have over-provisioned, right? But going by the guidelines offered by Microsoft and SAP together, you can do the right sizing. The other aspect is called tight sizing. What is tight sizing is that you only do the sizing for what is required, and you snooze it. In fact, my next slide talks about it. So you snooze it. So the difference between right sizing and tight sizing is right sizing is doing the correct infrastructure setup. Tight sizing is making sure that it's only utilized for the time for which it is required, right? So that is the difference between right sizing and tight sizing. The other aspect is rehosting and replatforming. This again depends on your choice. Rehosting is nothing but your lift and shift. Our option A, if you remember on the previous slide, on one of the previous slides, this is called rehosting. So there is no change at all. You just take the host and then put the database on a different VM on Azure and then start using it. Replatform means you may be messaging the data, you may be transforming the data and taking it onto the other system on Azure, right? Then from a VM sizing point of view, DE and M series are typically recommended. Again, there are guidelines available. From a storage perspective, actually storage plays an extremely important role because you all know that SAP is very database intensive, right? So what are the various options available? You have the Ultra SSD, you have the Premium SSD, Standard SSD, and then you have HDD. HDD is not at all recommended. You either go with Ultra, Premium, or Standard SSD based on your IOPS requirements. Then the other aspect is from an availability angle. There are various options available. LRS is locally redundant storage. Basically, what it makes sure is that data is replicated across within a data center. It's replicated. And then zone redundant storage is it is replicated across clusters within a zone. And then GRS is geo redundant storage, wherein it cuts across geographies. Okay, it could be across regions. Then the other RAGRS is read access. That is on the basis of request, read access will be provided. But GRS is geo redundant storage. GZRS is the same thing. Okay, GZRS is actually geo zone redundant storage. That means redundancy is achieved within a geography and also within a zone, right? It's a multiple. Then RA is read access in a GZRS scenario. So the reason I'm mentioning all of this is, considering the critical nature of your data, you may have to opt for the right choice. For example, GRS is typically used, geo-redundant storage is typically used from a DR replication standpoint. So when I cover the topic of DR, I'll be touching upon this, right? Then the other aspect to be considered is storage IOPS, okay? And then the max number of disks per VM. Okay, you might have done the VM sizing currently, but you guys may know that SAP requires a lot of mount points, okay? Hence there could be number of disks. So you make sure that the VM size and the number of disks attached to a VM are correctly matching. Otherwise, what will happen is that you may not actually require a disk, you may not require a particular VM of that size, but you may not be able to downsize it because you are stuck with the number of disks. Yeah, so that's another key consideration. The other key aspect is Azure NetApp files, ANF, right? So when we talk about SAP Central Services clusters, are typically sharing your volumes like HANA/HANA/data /HANA/log/HANA/shared. This plays a critical role. This renders the data via NFS or CAFS or SMB across multiple servers. So this plays a key role when you want to build clusters. Yeah. So you need to consider this is an appliance. Actually, this is a marketplace service that's available on Azure. So that's why I've included that as one of your considerations. Yeah. Okay. Now, one of the key things is cost consideration, right? Here, one of the key ways to achieve cost benefit or cost saving is via snoozing VMs. So typically, what you can do is non-production systems that are rarely used, or maybe a dev system that is only used, say 9 to 5, okay, during your developer's work time. Those systems can be up and running only during that time, and then otherwise you can snooze them, right? Or production workloads required only during peak. Typically your payslip or salary processing that happens towards the month end. Now, there are certain workloads that need to be up only during that time. You can only provision it during that time, and then the rest of the time you can snooze them, right? The other aspect is what is called as showback. What is meant by showback is that it's like a what if analysis, right? It says that if you were to run these systems, this is the kind of cost you incur. So how do you use showback? So you use showback by saying that if I were to run this workload constantly, I'm incurring $1,000 more per month. Okay, what if I shut it down? It's used for showing back to yourself as well as to your management how you can effectively utilize the VMs, right? The final aspect is using Azure reserved instances. Reserved instances are a very simple concept wherein you typically achieve 60 to 65% savings by subscribing to a particular workload for a specific period. For instance, you know for sure that your database cluster is going to run for 24/7. It is required. There is no way you are going to snooze it or you're going to shut it down. So in that scenario, you can opt for reserved instance. So you don't incur, for example, if you're incurring $100 a month for that, you may be only incurring $35 a month. Okay, so that's the benefit you achieve. So why I'm mentioning all of this upfront is that when it comes to SAP, the workloads are huge. So if you do not consider these, you might end up in a bigger consumption cycle. You may be incurring more cost than what you had originally planned. Right? That's the reason I'm mentioning these things. Now we'll get into the technicalities. Actually, so one of the aspects now we'll be focusing on the HA part, right? SAP application server. I'll just focus on that. So here, one of the ways to achieve high availability is that only the app servers can be put onto availability set on different availability set. So what an availability set does is that it makes sure that the upgrade domain and fault domain do not fall into the same data center. So it takes the particular workload and make sure that the workload is available despite a particular hypervisor failure or a particular data center failure, right? So that is the benefit of this. So you make sure that your app servers are cutting across the availability set, right? From an SAP Central Services point of view, one of the ways HA can be achieved is to have a load balancer and have an active node and a passive node, right? So your load balancer will be constantly checking which is available and then directing the traffic towards the active node, right? At the back end, like I said earlier, Azure NetApp Files ANF, you can use that to have the SAP MNT mounted using the NFS. So both the nodes get access to that. And then you also have a cluster witness in the form of Stoneth block device, SBD, that will be monitoring. So making sure that there is no failure. If there is a failure, the store happens seamlessly. Yeah, this is one of the ways to achieve HA with respect to the app and the central services, right? Now, the database HA is actually, it's not straightforward. It is achieved in the form of system replication. Okay, so system replication, what it does is, okay, before I go to that, you might see that I have struck off using shared storage as an option. You folks may know that Azure is all virtual, so there is no way you can have a shared storage that you do in a typical on-premises data center. That kind of an option is not available. So you have to consider an option of system replication. Yeah, so that is how the database HA can be achieved. So you have a primary server and you have a secondary server, and the replication of data and log are achieved using the system replication. Under system replication, you have two ways of working. One is synchronous and asynchronous. The other one is asynchronous. Under synchronous, the advantage is that it offers greater protection. That means as the database write, unless it is complete, the application is not given the control back. Okay, the write has to complete. Write has to complete, and the write has to be replicated to the other side. Okay, so that is synchronous. So it, as you can guess, it offers the greatest protection. But the thing is, databases need to be closer, because if there is any latency when it comes to replication, that is going to impact the performance. Yeah, so that is the synchronous option. The other one is asynchronous option, which offers row level of protection. What I mean by that is, in asynchronous scenario, the control is given back to the application, not waiting for the database replication to happen. Yeah, so it is possible that replication has not happened and the primary server fails. Okay, so that is why it has a lower level of protection, but it has got increased performance. Increased performance because the application doesn't have to wait for database write to complete or database replication to complete. Okay, these are the two choices. I think considering an Azure scenario, you can look at the synchronous option. You can choose the regions that are close by, and then you can do a synchronous replication. Yeah. So this is from a database high availability point of view. Then the other aspect is the disaster recovery. Yeah. So disaster recovery, in case of Azure, what happens is Azure, generally it's highly available. The SLA that is offered is typically above 99.9%. But in order to preempt any unforeseen failures, you need to have the DR enabled across Azure region. For example, what we have shown here is Azure West Europe being the primary site, with North Europe being the backup site, DR site for that. Yeah. So the virtual machines are copied. There's something called Azure Site Recovery. Azure Site Recovery, it helps with copying the data from primary site to secondary site. And then what also Azure Site Recovery does is, at the time of failure of the primary site, it will provision the VM on the fly and then make it available on the remote site, on the DR site. So that is something for you to consider, from a DR perspective. On the database front, ASR will not help because ASR does not do database replication. So you'll have to take care of the database replication from one region to another. So in case of failure, excuse me, in case of failure, you need to make sure that the secondary database is up and running. So it depends on your RPO and RPO objectives. Here specifically the RPO objective, recovery point objective. Yeah. Then from a SAP MNT mount point perspective, it's a NFS cluster that you have. Again, you can deploy tools like rsync or robocopy, or NetApp has got their own cloud sync service. You can use all of those technologies to do the replication from one region to another. So this way, data is available, and once the primary site goes down, the secondary site will be up and running with that data being available. Yeah, this is from a DR perspective. Now, the other aspect we need to cover is on the monitoring side. Okay, your workloads are functioning. And now, one of the capabilities that Azure offers is called Azure Monitor. Yeah. So what Azure Monitor does is that it basically gathers data from an application, from your operating system, from your Azure resources subscription, etc. And then this is turned into metrics, and this is also collected into log analytics. It's called log analytics. And then what happens is it can also integrate with your other apps, logic apps, or you can export API. For example, you see an alert, you want that to be turned into a ticket on your say ticketing system, say something like ServiceNow, right? So it can do that. It can do the integration. Now it can also respond. It can, one, in the form of sending an alert, or secondly, it can do an auto scale. You can program it in such a way that if the load exceeds say 80%, you auto scale it to another VM, right? You can also take such responsive actions. Then you can do analysis of that. You can do metric analysis, you can do log analytics, etc. Right? And visualization, it offers in-house, inbuilt dashboard capability. Otherwise, you can also integrate with Power BI. And then finally, you can derive insights out of it. Okay. Some of the insights could be that whether HA is working perfectly, are security measures in place, is performance is up to the mark, right? Is cost being optimized, right? For example, there is something called Azure Advisor. Azure Advisor can also act upon this and give you those recommendations. This is purely from an Azure monitor standpoint. Now, when it comes to SAP, what additional thing you have to measure or you have to add here is the those extensions, right? Azure monitoring extension for SAP. So this basically understands the nuances of SAP specifically, and then it can bring out those alerts, bring out those data points, etc. So that is specific to SAP. Yeah, this is from a monitoring standpoint. Now comes the sizing part of it. Okay, so one of the thumb rules says that you all know SAPs, right? The SAP Application Performance Standard. So from an Azure standpoint, the required SAPs can be the provision SAPs that you already have into the peak utilization divided by 0.65, right? These two things you must be knowing how much you have provisioned and what is the peak utilization. This your current tools may be able to give you this, right? Based on which you can look at the required SAPs, right? Now, the benefits this can offer, right? Here, for example, you have 3 machines of 12 core, 96 GB certain utilization, right? Now here you can downsize it to 16 core, 2 machines, right? So again, this is not a set in stone kind of a rule, but this is just to give you broad guideline as to how you can go about, from a sizing perspective. Again, specific to your workloads, you may have to look up on Azure Calculator to see what specifically meets your requirements, right? That's something we can work with you on this. But this is just to give you an idea how typically you look at the sizing of your SAP workloads, right? Now, from a deployment standpoint, you can look at broadly 3 options: standalone, distributed, or highly available. Standalone, as the name indicates, everything is loaded onto a specific VM or a specific resource, right? Your database, your central service instance, your primary application server, all are loaded onto one particular VM. See, this is typically useful for small environments and also for development, test dev kind of environment, right? Distributed is another option wherein you make sure that those components are decoupled, and then you load them separately on separate VMs. For example, database could be on a VM, your central services instance could be on another VM, primary application server could be on another VM, right? The other aspect is a highly available clustered model. Okay, we looked at a couple of options earlier. So again, what is recommended is this highly available cluster can be for your production environment, This can possibly for your QA environment. This can be possibly for your dev environment, right? Again, these are all not rules set in stone. We can have a relook at this. And the benefit that cloud offers is that anything can be turned into another version. For example, in a QA environment, you want to have cluster achieve. It's a question of just spinning off another VM and configuring cluster on them, cluster between the clustering technology between the VMs, and then going about that, right? So these are the various options that are available, deployment options. Okay. Again, what you can do is based on what you have in your on-premises setup, the same thing can be done on Azure as well, right? So you may want to follow the same principles on Azure as well. Now, from a DB deployment angle, there are two aspects to it. Maybe some of you are familiar, but I'll just again want to kindle your memory. Multiple components on one server, wherein there is one server where all the components are run, right? Multiple components on one database is where the databases are carved out. DB instances are carved are provisioned in such a way that instances are leveraged, right? Now, when you look at the HANA instance, it will become more clear to you. See here in a HANA scenario, what happens is you folks may know that HANA offers containerization. So this is preferred because HANA takes care of the containerization aspect of it. So the advantage is you run one instance where multiple system DBs as well as tenant DBs are run on that. Yeah, the operating system being common. Again, the choice is yours in terms of clustering, etc. But again, the containerization aspect of HANA takes care of that. Now, when it comes to HANA, it gives you two other possibilities. Okay, one is called scale up, the other one is called scale out. Okay, in a scale up scenario, what happens is you typically have an active passive kind of a node, and then you scale up the active node as and when required based on the demand, right? Then similarly, the passive node is also scaled up. Now, in a scale out scenario, what happens is there are multiple nodes. The nodes are configured for auto failover. Okay, when one of the nodes fails, the other nodes will one of the other nodes will take over. So that is achieved with the help of HANA system replication. Yeah, HANA system replication takes care of the data replication across these nodes. When it comes to scale up, it's an active passive setup. When it comes to scale out, it is a multi-node setup. Yeah. Okay. Now we'll go to the next one. So migration options, right? Again, we had A, B, C, D, if you remember, right? Lift and shift, I'm not touching because it's a fairly straightforward setup. But when it comes to lift and migrate, the other three options, one of the ways to go about is to change the DBMS, upgrade the SAP solution, and also look at the Unicode conversion. Because you may have a little endian, big endian kind of confusion as well, or a problem as well. So you need to factor those, right? Now, the other aspect is migrating to SAP HANA and Azure. So one of the minimum requirements is to have NetWeaver 7.4 plus to be available, and then migrate current DB to HANA, and then finally migrate the data to Azure. Okay, the next set of slides will talk about data migration to Azure. Okay, so from a planning perspective, one of the key things you need to consider is document the interfaces. Because what might have happened is you might have hard-coded the IP address or the DNS name or something. You basically make sure that those are documented, and then you move them in groups. Okay, applications that are closely coupled, that are interoperating, you make sure that those workloads are moved in groups, right? And then anything that is latency sensitive, you again take care of that. And then prepare the Azure environment. Make sure that standardized images are followed, so you don't have multiple images. You follow consistent set of images, follow naming conventions, follow security models, and as far as possible, use templatized models, so you are able to automate them with the help of ARM template or Terraform or whatever. And secondly, you don't make any mistakes while provisioning. Housekeeping and archiving, what we mean by that is before you embark on migration, you make sure that those archival data are taken care of. They don't make them part of your regular workloads. Do regular housekeeping so that unwanted data are purged, etc. Because see, one of the things that is going to happen is you are going to do a lot of data transfer towards Azure, right? As I mentioned earlier, there is a site-to-site VPN option, express route option. There is also something called Azure Data Box available. Azure Data Box is a service where you can ship your data in the form of a hard disk to them, then they will provision it over there. But typically it's time consuming, unless otherwise it's an extremely large amount of data. This is not preferred. You either go for S2S or express route. The other aspect is the landscape review. Whether you want to move the entire landscape onto Azure, or certain landscapes you want to keep them on premises, those things you need to consider, right? I mentioned earlier that we'll be sharing data points on the data transfer. So if you look at 100 GB data with 10 Mbps speed in place, it takes 3 hours, right? With 1 gigabits per second, 10 minutes. So why I pointed out it here is that based on your amount of data, SAP data, you may want to consider the amount of amount of time it takes for the data transfer. So you also need to understand whether it falls well within your maintenance window, right? If you have only planned for, say, a Saturday evening or a Friday evening, Friday night as a maintenance window, whether that falls into that is something you need to factor, right? These are all part of your planning effort. Then a migration method, in case of homogeneous migration, it's fairly straightforward. Just to recollect your memory, homogeneous migration means nothing changes, okay? No OS change, no DB change. So it's fairly, I mean, I oversimplified it, but it's kind of simple. You prepare the Azure environment, install the DB on the target server, stop the source SAP system, performs database backup, perform transfer of files, then DB restore, then use the system provisioning, software provisioning manager, install the SAP binaries and start the SAP system, right? The other aspect to consider for homogeneous migration or DBMS replication. That means you can, one fine day, you can start DBMS replication to your Azure database, and you can stop the database on premises after they have synchronized completely, and then turn on the application on the Azure side, right? The other aspect is Azure site recovery. This is another way to do it. What you can do is your database server, you can shut it down and then wait for application consistent snapshot for the database server, and use Azure site recovery to copy it onto the remote site, which is Azure, right? These are all from an homogeneous migration standpoint. Heterogeneous migration, there are multiple ways and means, but just one way I have articulated here is, again, prepare the Azure environment, do a system export, do a system import, and there are ways and means to optimize this. Like I said, it all depends on the size of the data, the number of functionalities you have, the amount of archival you have done or not done, various aspects are there. These are all from an heterogeneous migration angle. Okay. Migration options. I have just summarized on the slide what are the various options available. I'll just quickly touch upon in the interest of time. If you look at the complexity, backup restore is the lowest complexity. Azure site recovery is a medium complexity. Classical migration is medium. Database migration option has got the highest complexity. However, the advantage here is the data footprint is low. Okay, so if you do not have much bandwidth, but you want to still consider migration, you have a large amount of data, then this is one option you can look at. Yeah. Then there are various other third-party tools that are available from a migration standpoint. The final slide, or the final topic is, see, the way we should look at it is, this lays the foundation for transformation. I mean, your journey is not going to end after you have migrated to Azure. So I've just given you a few ideas here in terms of transformation. One of the ways transformation can happen is to have a common identity across your various applications, including SAP, right? You can start leveraging Azure. AAD stands for Azure Active Directory. So you can start leveraging Azure Active Directory for all your logins, right? So the advantage is provisioning, deprovisioning becomes extremely simple, right? The other aspect is, nowadays it's called data is gold. You consider this as a data platform. On the diagram adjacent, I have kind of tried to give an idea as to how the data that is available can be transformed into a predictive and a decision analytic visualization, right? So for example, you can take the data to Power BI and then have various dashboards presented. Since everything is has got a common data layer, now that is possible, right? The other aspect is your application to application integration, business to business integration, software as a service integration. All of them can be driven via the Azure integration services. You have logic apps, you have data gateway which attaches to Power BI. You have various options. So I've given you about roughly 3 ideas. One is having an integrated identity and access management layers, using data as information and doing predictive analytics around that. And finally, having a common integration layer with the help of Azure integration services, right? I think that covers my presentation. Sorry, I've exceeded about a minute, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. Okay, then I think I'll close the session. Thanks for your time. Thank you for participating. I hope the session was useful. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashok. Thank you.